Hello and welcome to another episode of Candor Beach. We are on episode 22, and today we'll be talking about whether it is possible to innovate under a socialistic structure. So, Sailesh, capitalism, socialism, that's always been a hot topic. Communism's made a massive impact on the world. Where do you stand on this? Can you define these three things for us?
So, if you define it, first we're going to start off with communism, right? In communism, the entire system, the state owns everything. The land, the means of production, the entire, the people structure, everything is owned by the state. In a capitalism, the entire there's something called free market economy. The market actually, works depending on how there is demand and supply. So that is capitalism, purely market. No, that's the second one, and the third one is socialism. Is like little diluted version of communism. More like, it's not exposing the harsh realities, but if you look at it, India is also considered as a socialist republic.
If I could add
So,
to what you've said, I don't believe that the center owns everything in communism because, like, if you look at Marxist theory, he propounds that at one point in time, the center, like, the need for a centralized state will also wither away, like power to the people. So you're right. I agree with the definitions of socialism and communism to a point where socialism is the like the little brother, the smaller sibling,
yeah,
but communism being the more radical form. We are looking at ownership from the state's perspective, but in communism, like, I think the need for centralization sort of withers away. But yeah, please go
yes.
ahead.
But in communism, the means of production, everything stays with the center. Like the government owns it. You cannot own land, or neither, and everything you can go and experience it. So nobody owns anything. So that is communism. So if you look at the pre
Again, I would
90,
differ. It's common ownership.
sure.
Communism talks about common ownership, like everybody owns everything. So nobody owns anything eventually, but
Exactly. So, sure. So, if you look at India, so I
hmm.
would also bring up to this point, right? So we have this socialist republic. What that means is, if you look at the structure of it constitutionally, the state can take your property anytime if it wants to. That is basically the socialist republic part of Indian constitution. So, yeah, I mean, it is, yeah, you own it, but if they really want to take it, they can usurp it anytime. So
Look,
that is,
an extreme example. I would say that ownership is more regulated. It's heavily regulated.
you can take that position.
You could
I
also
beg to
argue
differ.
you could also argue that like, as an example, when it comes to land leases, right? Like when you're purchasing land, it's like
Hmm.
a long lease from the government. It says
Yeah.
you own this for 99 years or something of that sort, right? It's not it's not yours.
Mhm. So since we gave a broad definition of all these three, right? So I'll ask you a question: does Marxist communism really work?
I would say if we could throw back to maybe the era of Plato and, like, the theories that he propounds in the Republic. Uh, so what he gets at is, in the words of Socrates, his teacher. Uh, he talks about how the ideal society is governed by a set of rules where there are classes. So classism is something that was seen is seen in India, has been seen in India for quite some time. No longer now, I suppose, but for the longest time, it has been quite prolific. In the Greek system as well, they talked about how the Greek Romans, the Mediterranean sort of a setup. So what Socrates was talking about was that you can have the warrior class, you can have uh, people who are more into commerce, people who are into agriculture and production, But there are certain rules that must govern each group, and that there can be no inheritance. So the evils of inheritance, like passing down wealth, the evils of wealth accumulation, those are rules that he takes care of. Like as an example, by the warrior class is supposed to be fed by everybody else. Like uh, since they're going out defending you, you need to make sure that they're nourished, and they will live in palaces, but these palaces will not have doors. So you have the people have open access to this area. And
Mm.
the concept of inheritance, right? Like your son or daughter does not inherit your class, it is
Mm.
down to merit. So there
Yeah.
are certain aspects that communism, that socialism have tried to bring in, that have tried to absorb, that have their merits and have been spoken of in ancient times as well. I'll say that, like they have they have their merits.
Sure. If you, yeah, so the common ownership is good. So it brings to the point where you're going to lack. So the everything boils down to, will you stifle innovation under communism or its little brother socialism? So how much of innovation happened during the capitalistic era compared to how much of innovation happened during the communism era? Yes, we have good examples. During the USSR, they actually innovated. They sent their expeditions to the moon before the Americans did, and then you have they innovated to make the nuclear bomb. So see, yeah, it does exist during the communistic era, but where does it corrupt everything? Why did communism fail? Is the main point. Like 99, I think 91 when USSR collapsed. Then if you look at the how India also reformed itself. So if you till 91, if you look, India followed that kind of a pattern of socialism, trying to do all this
So
stuff.
it feels like you aren't debating communism versus capitalism. It's a foregone conclusion in your head.
Not really. No, no, no. Don't get me wrong. I do give props to, like, if you look at socialism, it has free education for everybody. So free healthcare for everybody. So it has its own merits. But if you weigh both each other, which one would you choose?
I would say that what states have done eventually
Mm.
is a bastardized version of what you would have of the merits of these streams. At this point in time, capitalism works. Capitalism
Mm-hmm.
fundamentally works because if you consider game theory to be true, and most economists do utilize game theory, most consultants, like that's my background, we use game theory to determine who makes what sort of decision. With socialism, let's just say socialism, right? Because communism is sort of a subset.
Yeah,
So with
sure.
socialism, it is important that people work towards a common good. The commonality is the we bit is the center
Mm.
and focus. Whereas in
Yeah,
capitalism, it is more I centric, me centric.
yeah.
Now, in terms of game theory, how are you maximizing utility? That's the decision that you need to make. That's the fundamental that game theory is based off of. If you
Mm.
if you remember the prisoner's dilemma, the
Yeah,
this one problem statement where, and just for people who aren't aware of the prisoner's dilemma, a quick recap or quick build up onto that. In the prisoner's dilemma, there are two people who are caught, and they're given two choices each. You can rat on the other person and say that the other person's committed this crime, and they get a 10-year sentence. I'm making up the sentences, like it doesn't matter how
yeah.
long. They get a 10-year sentence, you go scot free. The other
Mm.
person has the same option. Or you could
Mm.
keep quiet,
Mm.
in which case you can keep quiet. Like you can rat on the other person, or you can keep quiet. And now the other
What
person
would
has the
happen then?
same. Now both the prisoners have the same options. Now you have a
Mm.
matrix, like a 2 by 2 matrix, where there are the different options that are weighed. If both of them
Mm.
keep quiet, they both get 2 years in prison each.
Mm.
If they both rat
Okay.
each other out, they
Mm.
get 10 years each.
Oh
If one
wow.
of them
Okay.
rats each other, the other one out, it's
Mm.
0, 10, 10, 0.
Okay.
Like you go scot free, the other person gets put into prison for 10 years, and vice versa.
Okay.
So that's the system.
Mm.
Now, ideally, if both of you keep quiet, both of you get 2 years. That's a more
Okay.
socialistic approach. Like if you're working towards a common good, you pick the both of us keep quiet and we get out with the minimum sentence.
Lesser of the evil.
Yeah, but you're trying
Okay.
to maximize your own utility. Your utility
Mm.
is maximum when you rat the other person out
Yeah.
because you get a 0 and the other person gets a 10.
Sure. Yeah.
So game theory would drive you to say that, all right, rat the other person out. And if both of them rat each other out, they get an increased sentence, like a 5, 5, 10, 10, whatever it is. So I would say that socialism requires everybody to play by the same rules and conform. Socialism, it isn't as individualistic as it is to working towards the community. And considering our origins, considering the origins of mankind, us being social animals, us being strongest in a group, I think
Mm-hmm.
socialism was a principle that would have worked very well. In today's environment, which is me centric, I would not advocate for socialism because the moment there are people who break out of those, to stop playing by those rules and focus on maximizing gains for themselves,
Yeah.
the system breaks down.
So I will give you a counter argument. So you said I have already made up my mind and how I'm biased
Do you know
against
why I said
communism,
that?
right?
Because you
Sure.
made statements like, do you know why communism has failed? Even India has reformed itself from socialism. That was why I was like, all right,
Yeah, I
foregone
mean, if you look
conclusion.
at 91,
Mhm.
the India opened up its markets, right? So it meant it went, free market trading, foreigners can invest in India. That opened the floodgates. India actually became rich post that. I mean, it almost defaulted, right?
So,
India
what did
in
India do
91.
specifically there? Like, why,
So,
after it opened its floodgates, it was near default. How did it
hmm.
avoid default?
So what they did is they actually pledged their gold, a lot of Indian gold, and they
Exactly.
brought in, yeah. So which was needed. The entire system was breaking down. The entire,
And now
if you look at,
let's look at today, where everybody's hoarding gold. All major banks around the world are hoarding gold. India does not have
not
that
just
gold
the
anymore.
bank,
Sorry.
not just the banks, people have gold.
Yeah. So
India has
people
a
are.
personal gold. If you take India as personal gold as a consideration, it has about 23,000 tons of gold all around the country. So if you're looking at the bank coffers, it's not at the first, it's not in the ranking level, but it still has significant amount of gold uh, all around the country.
Yeah, I would also like to add that we now trade in sovereign gold bonds to prevent
Hmm.
us from actually possessing all of that, uh, possessing an equivalent amount of gold. So,
Sure.
I would say that there was that, like in 91, when we went about pledging our gold, that was a little bit of a detriment to our country, but at the same time, it was what we needed. We were on the
Yeah.
brink of
We had
default.
no choice. Yeah.
We had no choice.
So, so to go a little tangential on it. So, if you look at capitalism, right? So, what really, like, if you look at the healthcare industry and how the capitalism actually promotes the healthcare industry, do you think actually the the capitalism actually helps the making medicines, or actually make it actually stifles the nutritional values, right? So if you look at the modern healthcare industry, you have all these the pharmaceutical companies trying to make drugs, but not to educate people over how nutrition can help. So if you look at all the modern day allopathic doctors, you end up going to a doctor, they're going to end up giving you a prescription, but they're not going to advise you so well on nutrition. That
Sure.
is another major issue with capitalism.
Why is that? Like, why aren't they advising you on nutrition as well? Isn't it just
Because
because it's not
it's
their area?
it's profit oriented. So if you look at capitalism, what are you going to make profit on? So if you actually you're going to make profit by selling medications. The pharmaceutical industry makes medications, and they actually sell this to make a lot of money. So that is a problem. So you're not actually helping people to educate them on nutrition. Rather, you're actually forcing them to take medication to solve a symptomatic problem.
I get where you're coming from, and I would say that once again, like considering the Hippocrates oath that doctors are required to take, and
Hmm.
like the fact that they're focused on making sure people are healthy, right? Like I'm going to treat people, I'm going to make sure that they're healthy. Now balance that with what the medical boards of countries are trying to make them do, wherein like I have to treat everybody, but at the same time that there are rules that govern how I'm going to treat people, because there is also this whole malpractice suits that can be filed against me. So I'm going to have to
Hmm.
safeguard against that. So there's a lot of documentation that I'm going to have to spend my time on, as opposed to spending time making people healthy. There are instances where um I have to put my own life at risk to make sure that someone else is treated. And that's sort of going against the whole survival of the self, right? Like there's self preservation. I was going to say survival of the fittest, but self preservation, it breaks that. There are things that medical boards are, and I'm talking about particularly around the COVID era, like during the lockdowns, where where doctors or healthcare professionals were forced back in just to make sure that people were getting treated. So there's the self preservation that's thrown out. They're doing inhumane hours. They're being forced to follow a set of rules just to protect themselves from liability. There are a lot of restrictions on them. And I think that prevents them from doing the sort of job that they need to. It's not a capitalism versus socialism argument there. It's more of a, like me personally, I think it's more of a, because there is capitalism, people are so concerned about wealth creation and wealth destruction that they are concerning themselves with not how can we as a society progress, but more along the lines of how can I save myself from a lawsuit.
Yeah. I mean, granted, I'm not trying to bash capitalism. It did bring in a lot of innovation. If you look at the drug market itself, there are so many drugs in the pipeline which will never come to light if it was not profit oriented. So, like right now, we have, for example, the Truvada for PrEP. It's kind of a HIV medication, so you can take it, and the HIV positive person can take that medication, and he won't be able, even if he has unprotected sex with an HIV negative person, it won't be affecting them. There won't be any transmission.
So
So
here's,
that's a phenomenal
yeah,
innovation
but
right there.
yeah, and it's occurred under the banner of capitalism, and therefore it's being attributed to capitalism, in my opinion. If it was a key issue, communistic governments, I wouldn't say communistic governance. Like, I'm not a communist. I'm not in favor of that. Let's say more socialistic oriented governments would also have maybe pushed to develop something like that. The problem with communism, like in my opinion, I'm just going to get it out there before I seem overly commie, is that at some point in time it devolves into things that are being done for the community and more of an oligarchy or like a dictatorship where I am telling you what to do. The power holder, am responsible for the distribution of everything. So there is centralized control. It is not
Sure.
ownership for everybody, it is dictatorship of sorts. At least that's what most communistic rules seem to be devolving into.
I mean, when you're talking about that, right? So in communism, what will be the pressing force for somebody to actually make like something a medication like Truvada for PrEP for HIV positive? What will be? There's no profit gain. So why would somebody really want to make something out of it?
Well, I would say one, your argument can't be profit versus not, because if communism is not for profit or socialism is not for profit, then obviously if there is no profit. So that's not a fair argument. I would get at it's more need oriented, or it's more driven by what of wants. From a, like, why did the cosmonauts beat out the Americans? Because they wanted to go into space and explore, or be the first. There was a space race. Surely the minds that came up with the hydrogen bomb, the minds that came up with cosmonauts, the minds that, I'm going overly USSR focused, but whatever. Like, they're very bright people. They can come up with sort of such a drug. Like, if there is a need, like if their population was primarily plagued by this and they wanted to devote themselves to it, they would. Here, with respect to capitalism, again, as a consultant, this is something that I need to be looking at on a day-to-day basis. How would I make sure my business is profitable? If I'm
Yeah.
launching a new product, or if I'm looking at creating a new set of products, I do a white space analysis. I look at what the potential gaps in the markets are, where I can step in and corner the market. Because when I corner the market, I get a benefit out of it, i.e., profits. So there's a very clear route in terms of capitalism to your drug. So that is undeniable, profit oriented. That is not to say that a socialistic setup would not have come up with it should the need have arisen.
No, I'm not saying it won't come up with it. It's just it's kind of it's a mind it's I have to brainstorm to see what will make somebody really achieve that under a socialistic framework. It's just it's something for our audience to think about too. So next, I'll have another question for you actually. So if capitalism is so good, it's actually good. Do you think it's actually creating this the climate change, because capitalism basically stands on consumption of goods. So back in the day, if you look, we had that Nokia phone, right? So you buy that phone, the Nokia brick, you can indestructible phone. So you buy the phone, you can have it for a very long time, and it's a still working product. You can have it even till today, and it'll still work. But if you look at the modern day, most of these phones, they don't last more than 1 or 2 years, and even the Apple, they ended up doing, now they stopped doing it, but previously they were actually throttling the speed so that to make the people, they would say
So
it for
what's
the
the
battery,
question?
but my question is it driving climate change? Is it the consumption because of capitalism is driving climate change? Is it? Do you believe it or no?
I would start by, I won't pose a counter question, but I'm going to pose a rhetoric one. What is the
Hmm.
alternative? Do we not consume? Like, for our
No, no. Like,
survival, for our survival, we need to consume. There has to be that. Now,
sure, it's a valid point. So what would be? So you said what would be the alternative, right? The alternative would be, back in the day, refrigerators, like, they lasted forever. Not now. Nowadays, electronics don't last that long. So did like capitalism actually bring us to a point where the quality of the products go down for
that is
durability purposes?
okay. So that's touching upon climate change, but it's a slightly different question, I guess.
Hmm.
With respect to durability, I would say that there are products that are valued for their durability. Like,
Mm-hmm.
as an example, if you are thinking about hardware,
Hmm.
Amazon reviews rate them on durability. And if they
Hmm.
are not, like, imagine a hammer or a screwdriver or whatever, that's not
Yeah.
durable. That's a problem. That's something that you'd red flag and move on to someone who produces more durable goods. In terms
Hmm.
of a car, there was a certain point in time, like in the 60s and the 70s, where you saw a dominance of uh, product focused companies, like
Hmm.
automobile manufacturers, as an example.
Yeah.
They were in the top 10 of the Forbes list. Now, what they did was they built in obsolescence. They stifled innovation in favor of the fact that if I build in obsolescence and then introduce this innovative feature over the next couple of years, it drives you to believe that you need to upgrade. And that mindset does impact the environment. That mindset does spur on decisions that have a negative impact on society. But that's just it. Capitalism, like I said before, is me centric, not we centric. The
Yeah.
detriment there is that when I'm focused on, like everybody today, like if we talk about the economic, like briefly, if we talk about the economic conditions of today, we're talking about potential recessions, we're talking about potential, like we're on the brink of that soft landing thing, right? Soft landing, recession,
Mm.
what have you. Now, why did we come to that? The question is like, how can everybody grow? How can everybody keep growing? Because there was an instance when uh, borrowing occurred with the promise of a certain degree of payment. Like you are borrowing, saying that I will pay back at 4%, 5%, 10%, whatever
Mhm.
the yield is.
Yeah.
And you're essentially, what that statement essentially is that it says that I'm borrowing against the future. Now, I may or may not be able to achieve that value in the future. There are certain systems that are participating in this economy today that will not participate tomorrow for whatever reason. In that case, I am borrowing against the future. Everybody's consistently borrowing against the future. Everybody's consistently of the belief that they're going to get a certain payout and that everybody's together is going to contribute. Right? Like I have promised to pay you 5%. You have promised the bank to pay 5%. The bank has promised the RBI that they're going to, or whatever the governing or body is, to pay a certain rate. That this is a long chain. Now, if one bit defaults, like say I default, then what happens? You no longer get your payout. If you no longer get your payout, the bank doesn't get that payout. The bank doesn't get that payout, somebody else doesn't get that payout. There are differential rates as well. You've given me 5%, I'm paying you at 5%. So you are paying the bank at 4%, right? You have to make some money.
Hmm.
So the bank is paying the RBI at 3%. So there is like what I'm getting at is it does get complicated to a point of calculating like every single touch point. But at some point in time, there are areas where things just start falling apart. I'm borrowing against the future without knowing whether I'll be a going concern into the future. Like there is
Yeah.
that uncertainty, because of which things start to collapse. The pursuit of growth, essentially, the pursuit of growth from the car manufacturer's perspective from 40, 50 years ago, where they built in obsolescence, is
Hmm.
not sustainable. And therefore, I would argue that driving consumption for the sake of consumption is bad for the environment. When
Yeah.
Apple comes out and says they're going to be carbon neutral, what does that mean? Like honestly, like let's take a step back and decide, what does that mean? Does that mean that you have no impact on the climate, or by a certain definition there is the impact that you have on the climate or on the environment is being negated by other impacts that you have decided or somebody else has decided for us is negating that? Like as an example, I have consumed 100 watts of energy, but I have planted 10 trees, which through some calculation is 100 is equivalent to 100 watts of energy at some point in time. Is that factual?
It's like the justification given by Bill Gates that he uses his private jet to go around the world because he has carbon capture.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
invested in millions of dollars in carbon capture.
It
It's
is the
kind
same.
of that argument.
It
Yeah.
is exactly that. So I would say that 100% capitalism impacts the environment. We are fooling ourselves by to an extent by saying that, oh, if we follow these ESG norms or if we do this and that there will be no impact on the climate. But at the same time, just so we are clear, I'm not talking about, when we're talking about climate change, we're not necessarily also talking about how we're influencing the global temperatures. That's a different
Hmm.
conversation. Just so that everybody is clear on that.
Another topic, another pod topic, probably. So So tell me another thing. So this is my opinion, right? So capitalism is good, but then it also causes monopolies. It actually, proliferates monopolies in those industries. So if you look at, um, for example, if you look at India, right? So there is a monopoly with Reliance. So Reliance is acquiring everything, almost every business
Tata.
into it. Tata. So I mean, monopoly, duopoly, um, and these big companies getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, what my question is, just because of these monopolies and their, cartel-like behavior, how they, they have predatory invest lending. They lend into, like, for example, you looked at Dunzo issue, right? So, Reliance is trying to acquire Dunzo at a very cheap price, but they also have about 20 or 30% stake in that company, and they're not giving more. And when the company is actually going down the lane, they want to let the company go down, and they'll acquire it eventually when it's way, pennies on the dollar, something like that. So predatory lending with monopoly, all these are proliferating because of capitalism. Do you think there is an answer for this in communism or in socialism?
As in, like, can this be prevented?
Yeah, I mean, I understand in socialism there's not going to be a monopoly, or, like, how can the
No, was your
principles of,
question, can this be prevented?
yeah,
I would argue in socialism, these companies might not exist in the first place. As in,
sure,
like, if you look at Dunzo is a delivery
hmm,
app, right? Like,
yeah,
it
hmm,
you can charter individuals to do specific tasks for you, like bring you medicine from point A to point B. Or a friend of
hmm,
mine used Dunzo. Like, he was flying out to the US and he was
hmm,
obsessed with scarves, or at least he wanted to
hmm,
get scarves made. So what he did
hmm,
was he sent a Dunzo driver to his to buy material for him. He had
start,
already
yeah,
identified materials. He sent this Dunzo guy to go pick up those materials for him, and not
oh
bring it to
wow,
him, but deliver it to the tailor, who he phoned in and
oh,
said, asked the tailor to make the scarves to his specifications, and then had
hmm,
another delivery guy bring them back in. So Dunzo was an incredibly useful thing. There was a
hmm,
use case for it. There is a use case for it. It definitely brings in convenience, but I can only speculate at this point in time why Dunzo hasn't been doing well. Like, as an example, maybe its business model, its pricing isn't appropriate. Like, if you're
hmm,
overly focused on the wrong metrics, like with Blockbuster as an example, Blockbuster versus Netflix. Blockbuster had started a Netflix equivalent as well. They were competing online, but their problem was they were looking at least this is what I've read. They were focused on the wrong metric. They were looking at revenue per square foot, and obviously, in a more delivery oriented, Netflix oriented model, delivery per square foot doesn't make sense. It's going to be negatively impacted. Because of that, like, because it was negatively impacted, they decided to shutter that new division, and Blockbuster eventually became went on the way of the dodo.
yeah. Basically,
Uh,
they didn't innovate, right?
they went no, they did innovate. They just focused on the wrong metric and thought they were failing. So I think Dunzo may have been doing the same. I don't know. Like, I haven't looked at Dunzo, but I would
Yeah,
speculate that there are similar issues in a capitalistic market, in a market where you're looking at optimal money allocation. I would encourage companies like Reliance to come in and step in and fix businesses that are good. The business model, the value proposition is good, but there is something wrong within that entire jigsaw puzzle. Like, say pricing is off. Maybe that's something that I need to come in and fix. The value proposition is off. Maybe that's something I need to come in and fix. The marketing is off. Like, a cousin of mine, I was talking to him about buying a new car a while back, and his advice was cars aren't bad. Like, when a company like a Maruti or a Tata or Mahindra or whoever manufactures a car, it's likely going to be good. It's going to have its merits.
hmm,
But if it's poorly marketed, or if it's got the wrong image, it's going to tank. Like, the Tata Indica became like a taxi in India. It was a good car.
Nano. You remember the Nano?
Yeah, people weren't willing to be seen as someone who could only afford the Nano, right? Like they were like, oh, that's for
Even
impoverished
though
people.
they only had a two-wheeler,
Yeah, it was
they
like
didn't want to buy a
it was
Nano.
like, yeah, I'm not impoverished. I can buy whatever I feel
Yeah,
like. It's and also the Nano was not a 1 lakh car at the end of the day, right? Even though it was marketed
yeah.
as one. Whatever.
1 lakh meaning $2,000.
Right.
In perspective, a brand new car for $2,000. It was actually marketed as the
thousand
world's
dollars,
cheapest
no,
car.
thousand something dollars.
1,200.
1200 ish, yeah.
Well, yeah, under 2,000. So that's one of the major things. So thoughts on universal basic income?
I think there is a use case in Canada.
Oh
Uh,
my God. Okay.
there was this example in Canada. What had happened was one village or one city, what have you,
Mm,
was taken as an example, like a sample experimental place where everybody was guaranteed 15,000 Canadian dollars. And what they saw was that people started becoming pickier about the kind of jobs that they did. They decided on, like, they would take things that they actually enjoyed, they would take things that actually challenged them, as opposed to I need some basic income and therefore I need to go about struggling. They also saw that stress, particularly, like, considering that stress is a big factor as to why lifespans get shortened, stress came down
mm,
by a massive amount. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was like 60% or something.
mm.
So there is
So
a benefit for universal income, but again, I think you need to have the right mindset. If your mindset is, like, as an example, like, and this is a hypothetical scenario, right? Like, I give you $15,000. Like, there are individuals of the lower echelon within certain countries, like ours as well, where it's a problem. Like, you give them a certain amount, like 100 rupees, 200 rupees, 300 rupees. They won't save it, or they won't be like, all right, I'm going to use this for food. There have been instances where they just go and spend it on alcohol, at which point in time you need to ask yourself, is there a certain value? Like, I need to guarantee everybody $100 per day or something of that sort, like a basic value, like 100 rupees won't cut it. Or is it like, in certain scenarios, in specific locations, like maybe the first world as opposed to the developing world, you can implement this and you can't implement it somewhere? I don't know those factors just yet. So, from an argument in terms of universal uh, income, basic income, there are its merits. There are scenarios where it succeeds, but I don't think it's going to succeed globally because there are very, very strong detrimental uh, repercussions of when it fails.
yeah, so my opinion, universal basic income is, like, I don't, like it. I'm totally against it, because if you end up going that route, you're gonna end up taxing the entire population more than 50%. So, which is gonna affect the entire economy itself. So, based on that, that's what I think. It's not really great, but it is what it is, man. It's socialist like that, right? Basic, universal basic income.
I
So, what are
understand.
your closing thoughts?
Closing thoughts are that there are strong merits to socialism. I think, with, but honestly, socialism requires everybody to participate in it, like,
Hmm.
together. It can't be individual centric, and we are living in a world that is quite individual centric, and therefore, uh, we just need to keep that in mind. Like, socialism's good, might not work.
All right, guys. I think we're at the end of our pod. If you like our content, please like and subscribe. And click the bell icon for further if you
Notifications.
notifications. Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you.
thank you. And for next week's topic, we'll be bringing in gaming to you guys.
Yeah.
All right.
Psychology of gaming.
Psychology, the ecosystem of gaming. All right. See
Yeah.
you on the next one.
Thank you.